In the previous couple of videos, I have been talking about polar patterns and beamforming in Ambisonics, and I have left this third and last video to share with you something I have been working on for the last year and a half, and I'm really excited to finally just show you a preview sneak peek. However, if you are not very familiarized with what polar patterns are or what beamforming is, I really encourage you to watch the couple of previous videos that are there. If you have already watched them, well, you are welcome to continue watching this video. My name is Alejandro and we are the Audio Brewers. So, beamforming. We already know what beamforming is. However, I am super excited to tell you that I have been working on my own beamforming algorithm. I have written this algorithm from scratch and I have optimized this algorithm to work in any order from second to seventh order to give you the best beam possible. Trust me when I tell you, to me, this is the best beamforming algorithm that exists, and I'm going to prove it to you. Initially, I'm going to prove it to you on paper so that you can see how the beam compares to other beamforming algorithms that exist out there. So let's just see how this looks in graphics so that you can understand what I mean. So here I have the typical graphic of an ambisonic signal being decoded to a cardioid. The front of the signal is here, so you can see that it's very focused here, and the back of the signal is here, so you can see that there is no sound here. You can see also that it's not that narrow, it's quite wide because it's grabbing a lot of signal from the back, but the rejection from the back is perfect. You have no sound coming from the back. There are other decoding algorithms that are going to make this blob narrower. However, you're going to introduce some bleed from behind, just like you did with traditional microphones that we talked about in the previous video. Check it out. You have here the max 3 decoding algorithm. You can see that is much narrower than the cardioid algorithm, but then you have a blob behind, right? So it's not rejecting the sound from behind. And finally, you have the probe algorithm, which is going to give you an even narrower signal, but the blob behind is big. It's just much bigger. These are the trade-offs when you are working with a first-order signal, that the narrower the signal is, the bigger the blob is behind. And this is why I decided not to optimize my beamforming algorithm for first order. I'm just using a typical cardioid decoding algorithm because I would rather have a complete rejection in the back than having a blob in the back. But this is just my personal taste. When we move to second order, things start getting really interesting. Check it out. I have here a cardioid polar pattern from a second order ambisonic signal, and you can see that it's much narrower than the cardioid or the first order ambisonic signal. So just like there are probe and max 3 in first order, you also have them in second order. Let's check them out. First of all, you have the max 3 algorithm. You can see that it's much narrower than the cardioid and very narrow in comparison to the cardioid of the first order, but you have a tiny blob behind. It's not that big, or is it? We'll talk about that later. And then you have the probe algorithm, which is really narrow, but then you have a blob in the back and some blobs in the sides that exist. This is a trade-off when you go higher in order, is that it's much more difficult to get completely rid of the sides. You're gonna have some blobs that get introduced on the sides. However, the front is really narrow. Now, let me just hide this cardioid algorithm. And now let's explore my beam in comparison to these two beams. If we display the Audio Brewers beam in second order, you can see that the blob is just a little bit wider than that of the probe, but there is no blob behind. So there is a semi-perfect circle with complete rejection in the back, and it's great. It's just great. In comparison to cardioid, it's much more narrow. And in comparison to the probe, which is very narrow but has a blob, well, Audio Brewers doesn't have any blob. And these blobs, they look small because, as I talked to you in the first video, we're always talking about these charts in 20 decibel ranges. However, we're in the digital world. Let's just explore what happens with these ranges when you maximize the signal response. So in second order, let's just go a little bit deeper in the signal. Right now we are in a range of 20 decibels. Let's just go to 25. Or how about going to 30 decibels? Maybe 35. How about 40? Okay, let's just stop there. 40 decibels range. Now let's explore the different algorithms that exist again. You have the cardioid, which is again a very big blob. You have the max 3, which is smaller, and then you have these blobs, happening on the sides. Then you have the probe, which has a really, really large blob behind and in the sides, and then you have audio brewers. These are the blobs of audio brewers beam in second order. Let's move to third order. Things start to become really, really interesting when we go higher in orders. In third order, let's just start by showing you the cardioid, the typical cardioid signal. You can see that the cardioid is much narrower than the second order cardioid. However, the audio brewer's second order is still narrower than the third order cardioid, meaning that the second order audio brewers is better than the cardioid of the third order. Let's just continue exploring. Let's just move to the world of third order ambisonics. You have the cardioid signal. Now let's explore the max-re and the probe signals. In the max-re, you have a narrower signal, but with the expected blobs. And then in the probe, again, you have a lot of blobs happening on the sides and behind. So it's much more narrower, but you have a lot of, sound coming from the sides. And there is one extra algorithm that I want to put here, which is the Zelia algorithm, which is a really good algorithm that exists for third order. Let's just explore it. This is the S1 algorithm. And this is how the third order ambisonic signal is decoded with the Zelia algorithm, right? So it's really, really good because there is complete rejection in the back, and it's really, really good in comparison to the other algorithms. So I'm just going to hide them. Let's just leave the cardioid and the Zelia. And so you have here the two algorithms and how different they are between them. And now I'm going to include our algorithm, the audio brewer's third order beam. You can see that the audio brewer's third order beam is pretty much as wide as Zelia's, but it pretty much has no blob behind. There is like really, really good rejection. Let's just zoom in the signal even further than 40 decibels and explore how this works. Let's go to 45, 50. We are in a 50 decibel range. This is a lot of decibels, just to compare the third order ambisonics blobs. So if we go to the third order ambisonics cardioid, you can see that it's a typical cardioid signal. But then if we go to the Zelia beamforming algorithm, you can see that the blobs become bigger. And if you compare it with the audio brewer's algorithm, you can see that the audio brewer's algorithm has much smaller blobs on the side, and still you keep rejecting completely 100% whatever is happening behind. So you have the same width of Zelia's, and the blobs are smaller, meaning that the rejection on the sides and behind are much, much better. This is really, really good. How about moving to fourth order ambisonics? Let's do it. Let me just start by showing you the fourth order cardioid polar pattern. And you can see that the third order beam of Zelia and audio brewers are much better than the fourth order cardioid. Let me just hide them and let's just move completely to fourth order. In fourth order, you have the cardioid polar pattern. And if we explore the max-re, you can see that it's much narrower, but then you have these blobs happening, and then you have the probe, which is really, really busy when it comes to blobs around. Let's just explore audio brewers. This is the beam that audio brewers has to offer for fourth order. It's so much better because in comparison to probe, which is like doesn't reject almost anything in the sides, and max-re, it rejects more, but it's much wider. Well, audio brewers is so much more narrow and is rejecting so much sound from the sides that is really, really, really directional. Okay, really, really exciting. Let me just hide the probe and the max-re. So let's just zoom in even further than 50 decibels. How about going to 60? Or let's just go to 70. At 70 decibels, you can see that the cardioid polar pattern of the fourth order signal is just, again, a big pattern. And audio brewers is still very, very narrow, and the blobs on the sides are 30 decibel and more away from the original signal at 0 azimuth and 0 elevation. It's really, really narrow. It's really, really, really cool, this beam. So how about moving to fifth order? Let's just start by displaying the fifth order cardioid polar pattern. You can see that still the Audio Brewers fourth order is much better than the fifth order cardioid. So let's just hide the fourth order. And here you have the fifth order polar pattern. How does the max-re and how does the probe decoding beams look? Let's just see. Max-re, you have a lot of blobs, like you have a very narrow polar pattern, but then there is a lot of leak from the sides. And then you have the probe. And the probe is really, really busy on the sides. How about Audio Brewers? Let's check it out. This is the polar pattern of Audio Brewers in fifth order. You can see that I have focused so much in minimizing the blobs that happen in the sides because I want to increase the rejection of whatever is happening in the side. So in comparison, the Audio Brewers with the probe is so busy all around the signal, whereas Audio Brewers is silent. And the max-re, well, the max-re is much wider and it has less leakage, but it's much wider. So it's really, really cool. So how about moving to sixth order? Like we are in a 70 decibel range. Let me just increase the range a little bit further. 80 and 90. At 90 decibels, which is an insane number, you can see that the sound of the Audio Brewers beam is so narrow and there is so much rejection on the sides. It's really, really cool. And what happens if we move to the next order? Let's just move to sixth order. Check out the cardioid ordinary decoding pattern. You can see that the Audio Brewers fifth order is still better than the sixth order polar pattern. And let's just jump to the sixth order. And here you have the typical cardioid polar pattern of sixth order. How about exploring max-re and probe? On max-re, you can see that you have a lot of things going on the sides and behind. And in probe, you can see that it's really, really busy on the sides and behind, okay? So what happens if we explore Audio Brewers sixth order beam? Let's check it out. This is our beam in sixth order. You can see that it's really, really narrow and that the rejection on the sides is much, much greater than that of max-re and probe. So the beam is really, really cool, right? And we're talking about 90 decibels range, which is an insane number. Now, finally, let's explore seventh order Ambisonics, which is pretty much the highest order that our beam decoding supports. Let's check it out. Let me just hide this couple. And let's just move to seventh order Ambisonics. So first of all, we have here the seventh order cardioid, which is just a little bit narrower than the sixth order. And let me just hide the sixth orders so that we move into the territory of seventh order Ambisonics. Again, in seventh order Ambisonics, you have the cardioid polar pattern, and then you have the max-re and the probe polar patterns. The max-re is much narrower than that of the cardioid, but it's very busy on the sides, and then the probe is really, really busy on the sides, but it's much narrower. And then Zilia also has an algorithm for beamforming seventh order signals. We're going to explore it here too. Let's just display it. This is the Zilia S1 beamforming algorithm. You can see that it's much more effective than the other algorithms. However, it's quite busy on the sides and behind. Okay, now how about Audio Brewers algorithm? Okay, let me just hide the probe and the max-re because they're really, really inferior in comparison to Zilia's. So here you have Zilia, and then you have here the cardioid. How does the beam look if we use the Audio Brewers algorithm? Let's check it out. This is our beam, and I am extremely proud of this beam because not only have I achieved a very narrow beam, but I have gotten away with the rejection of whatever is happening behind the signal. And it's just insane that we are talking about 90 decibels. Let me just increase it to 100 decibels so that you can just go to the maximum level of comparison. At 100 decibel range, which is completely crazy, you can see that the Audio Brewers algorithm has almost no bleed after plus or minus 90 degrees. It's really, really good. So let's just rewind and check how this beam looks if we were looking at this signal in a smaller range, because, I mean, let's face it, 100 decibel is an insane number. So let's check it out. This is the 7th order beamforming algorithm from Audio Brewers. And if we were to grab it and take it down to 50 decibels, you can see that at 50 decibels, this is a really, really cool beam. Let's just take it down a little bit more. 40 or even 35. At 35 decibel, which is pretty much what these microphones use to show you the polar pattern frequency responses, this beam works really, really well. This beam gives you the same beam in every single frequency, and it's not frequency dependent. And at 35 decibel range, you see almost no bleed on any other side than that of in front of the signal. Let's just compare at 35 decibel range how our beam looks with the previously mentioned beams. Okay, the Audio Brewers beam against an ordinary cardioid polar pattern. You can see that the cardioid polar pattern is much more wider against the max re. You can see that the max re has much more bleed on the sides and a little bit on the back. And against a probe, you can see that the probe is a bit narrower, but there is a lot of bleed coming from behind and from the sides. And finally, against the Zilia, you can see that they are as narrow as one another. However, the Zilia has much more bleed on the sides in comparison to that of Audio Brewers. And how do all the Audio Brewers beam look next to one another? 7th, 6th order, 5th order, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd. This is how all our beams look with the Audio Brewers beamforming algorithm. I really am proud of this algorithm. It took me about 18 months to create it, and I have tuned it so that it works in every single order from 2nd to 7th uniquely, so that it can give you the best beam in every single order. You will be able to hear this algorithm in our next video. In the meantime, if you have any questions or any comments, you can leave them in the comment section below. My name is Alejandro, and we are the Audio Brewers, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers!